Hey Stampers, Kim from stampingandperfection.com. I'm super excited that you're joining me today. I'm here with the 7 Kids Craft Store as part of their YouTube design team, and we are having a video hop today. You'll find all the 7 Kids Craft Store's links below to their social media and to the store where you can get all of the products that I'm showing you today. And you will also find links to the other design team members' videos because we are having a video hop today. So there are 5 of us sharing videos with you, and we're very excited to share the August release. These are exclusive stamp sets from 7 Kids Craft Store, and the release includes 2 little fairy sets. There is a cute birthday fairies and a back to school fairy set, and then there is a Pizzeria Parlor and a Pizzeria Kids stamp set. Those are the 2 that I'll be sharing with you today. Other design team members will do some fairy cards. So I'm going to do kind of an intricate card with some masking because I want to do a single layer card. I want to create a sunset background with some silhouette mountains in the back. And I also want to create a patio underneath the table and the chairs, so it'll be like the kids are sitting outside eating their pizza with the pizzeria guy delivering their pizza. So I've created a sketch so I know that I kind of have an idea, and it's a stick figure sketch, but I wanted to have an idea of kind of how I wanted to lay it out. And to start with, I'm going to use this Inkadinkadoo stamping mask paper because to create the scene, I need to mask the images. And I created that sketch so I could decide what needs to be stamped first, what needs to be stamped last. So I will stamp the first images, then I will mask them, then I will stamp the next ones and mask those. So my first step is to create the masks. And here you can see that I've decided what needs to go where. The kids will be sitting on the chairs, so the kids will be in front of the chairs, then the chairs will be in front of the table, and the table will be in front of the pizzeria guy. So since I want the kids to be sitting on the chairs, they need to be the images in front. I need to stamp them first. So I'm going to pull out my Misty, and I'm going to use my Misty for this. This is whatever stamp positioner you have, you use. These stamp positioners are great inventions for doing really intricate cards like this. It makes it so much easier, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Now you notice that I'm using the Sizzix little double-sided sticky grids. I love that. I use that instead of my magnet. Sometimes I find the magnet gets in the way of completely stamping an image. Now I've got a piece of Nina Solar White. This is heavyweight. It's 110 pound, and it's cut at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm just placing my stamps. I know I want the table in back. I want the chairs in front of that. Then the kids are going to be sitting on top of the chairs, and the pizzeria guy is going to be in back. He's going to be the last thing I stamp, so I didn't even bother placing him. I kind of wanted to get a placement of things so that I could use my Misty to pick up those kids. I'm going to take all the other stamps off, and I'm just changing out my paper here because I got a little smudge of ink. I've been having a great time playing with these little stamps. It's so much fun because I love that they coordinate with the Ice Cream Parlor stamps from last month. And so if you have those, you can use parts of those for creating pizzeria scenes as well. So I'm just using this is Catherine Pooler's Midnight Black ink, and it's a permanent black ink. And I am just inking it up, and I found that the images are kind of like have some small spots. So I find that if I ink that up and stamp it twice lightly, I get a really good image. So I'm going to do that with each one. So the kids are going to go in front. I stamp them first. Then I'm covering with the masks, which I already made, and I fussy cut them out. And I tried to get as close to that line around the kids as I could when I was fussy cutting. I don't want there to be big gaps. So now I'm placing the chairs, and I'm trying to place it so that their knees will be underneath, or their knees will be over the top of the chairs. So I'm kind of eyeballing that, and I've played with it a couple times just so I can get the placement. So you might need to sometimes practice on a piece of like copy paper just to do this. And again, I'm stamping this twice. And once I stamp the chairs, then I will mask the chairs. If I don't get them placed correctly, or if I didn't cut the mask quite tight enough to the lines, I might get some gaps. I'll use my journaling pen to, complete any lines from those chairs that don't come out all the way. And it's just easy to do. A nice thin line journaling pen like a 0.5 will work great for that. So now I'm placing the table. The table's going to be kind of behind the kids and the chairs, so that comes next. And then once I get the table stamped, I will actually then mask that and go ahead and place that pizzeria guy behind it, and then I'll mask the pizzeria guy because I want to create the mountains and the sunset. So that'll be my next step. So when I use this ink, this is permanent black ink, but sometimes it takes a little bit to dry. So you need to give your image time to dry before you start coloring it in, because I'm going to color the kids and the table and the pizzeria guy with my Copic markers. I'm going to use my Distress inks to do my ink background, and then I'm going to use Copics to create the patio stones. So I'm just stamping this pizzeria guy here, and masked cards take a bit of time to do, like all this ink blending and the Copic coloring. But you know what? It is so relaxing to do because you start creating these scenes and you get really involved in them and you kind of forget everything else. So I love doing cards like this. I also love that I'm starting with one piece of cardstock and creating a whole scene. And you can see one of the cards I created earlier just to practice. So I put down a piece of that 3M removable Post-it tape to block off where I want that patio to go. Now I've just torn a piece of paper and I'm using that to create the mountains that I want in the background. I'm going to do kind of like a silhouette mountain scene because I'm doing a sunset, so things get darker in the background as the sun starts to set. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm using Distress Oxides because that's what I have. If you prefer Distress inks and that's what you have, use those. If you don't have Distress at all, go ahead and use whatever dye inks you have, like your Catherine Pooler inks, or I also have Altenew ink pads that I love. Just go ahead and use whatever you have. You're just ink blending ink on there. It doesn't matter what it is. You can go ahead and use whatever is on your shelf. So I am using black soot, and I want this to be a little bit dark because I just want it to look like a very set of mountains very far away in the evening, or as evening is setting. So I'm just going right over those masks, and I'm holding that torn paper down. I use that technique all the time. Now you can take the other half of that torn paper and place it over the mountains to mask off the mountains to do the sunset. And I'm not sure why. I think I just forgot to put it there and it turned out okay. I'm going to go ahead and remove that that 3M Post-it note tape, because that when you use that, the ink sits on top of that. It does not absorb the ink like paper does, so you have to be careful that you don't smear that all over the place. Now I'm also going to, out of my masking paper, I'm going to punch. This is a 1-inch punch that I'm using. And when was the last time you used your punches, right, with all the dyes out there now? I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of very light yellow, and this is fossilized amber, and I'm going to put that where I want that sun to go. So then I put my mask down. I don't like a bright white sun when I remove it because that's not what the sun looks like. I'm going to mask a little heavier just right across where the sun is. And you can do the ink blending on this sunset any way that you want. But the blue in the sky should go toward the top, and I'm using two. I'm using Salty Ocean. So I'm putting that down first, and that's a little too bright for a night sky because that should look more like night sky above there. But I really like this color, and when I tried the stormy sky all by itself, it was too dark. It was definitely too stormy for me. So I decided to combine the two. So I used the stormy sky over the top of the salty ocean, and I liked that much better because the stormy sky knocked down the brightness, but the salty ocean made it a little bit brighter, not so stormy looking, more like evening. So I'm using a little bit of dried marigold, a little above that yellow line and a little below, and then my very favorite picked raspberry. And I'm trying to mix that picked raspberry in with that marigold and in with that blue, so I get a little bit of purple, because when I look at the night sky, I see a lot of purple at night. So I'm using that right above the mountains also, because it's usually redder toward the bottom of the sunset along the along where you want your like sun to be setting. And I at that point realized I didn't put the other half of the torn paper down to mask over the mountains, but it's okay. So I just use a little of that yellow, that fossilized amber, to go over the top. And then when I remove that sun mask, I really like the way that came out. So I'm going to remove all my masks. And notice I'm just putting those masks, because they're temporary adhesive, I'm just putting them on the backing sheet that goes with the Pizza Parlor set. And I can use those again a few more times. So I love that. And this set actually, by the way, I don't have to make it a Pizza Parlor. There are all kinds of birthday sentiments that you can use here as well. So to color in, I'm starting with R29. I'm going to use R29, R27, R24, and R21. So I'm just coloring, I'm going to go from darkest to lightest and then lightest to darkest. So I'm just like outlining the pleats and the top edges of the tablecloth. And then I'm going to go right over that with the R24, and basically I'm going over the top of those lines I just drew and then making them a little longer and a little thicker with that R24. Then I'm going to pull out, excuse me, that was R27. Now I have the R24, and I'm going right over the top of those, and I'm just extending everything out. I'm kind of filling this in more with this color, and I'm just going to fill in quite a bit of this and kind of blend those lines. So I lost a little bit of my darkness, so I'm adding in a little bit more R29 and R27, and then making sure all my lines are blended. And then I'm going to pull out that R21 and just fill in the rest of those spots. So I'm not doing anything fancy here, and I always find that when I do my Copic coloring that I like to give it a little bit of time to dry and blend. So I feel like the ink needs a little bit of time to do its work, and I'll give it that time. So I went from darkest to lightest. Now I'm going to go from lightest to darkest. So I'm adding in a little bit more of that R24 and just, filling in a little bit more. Then I'm going with the R27, a little bit less, just redarkening those pleats and the edges of the top of the table. And then I'll do the same thing with the R29 and call it a day on that tablecloth. So you can make those light spots as wide or as narrow as you want to. I just want it to appear that it's got some flow and dimension. So I'm being a little fussy on the tablecloth because that's the biggest part. And I'm also going to use those same colors for the chair seats and for the scarf that the pizzeria guy has around his collar. So I'm just being fussy now. When I'm all done, I just like to go back over with the lightest colors. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. And there's not a lot of room on those chair seats, and there's not a lot of room on that neck scarf that he's got or that bandana, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just, trying to get a little bit of each of those colors in there just to give it some shading. That's all I'm doing. I'm not being fussy about the shading in these little spots because it's hard to see once it's done, but as long as I've shaded it, it gives it dimension and it makes it more interesting, I think. So now I'm going to use some of I'm using my warm grays, my W's. For this, I'll be using W2, W1, W0, and then a little BV 0000. So I'm basically taking, again, oops, that's W3, isn't it? I'm basically taking the darkest gray I'm using, which is W3, and I'm just going along the edges of where the hat is puffy and along where like his armpits and the edges of his cuffs and where the coat buttons and overlaps the other side. And then I'm using my W1 and just going right over the top of that and pulling the gray out a little bit, trying not to go too deep into, I don't want it to look gray. And I'm doing the same thing with the W0. But you need to add a little bit of gray to make it look white. And then I use the BV 40s and pull that out, and it kind of blends it into the white a little bit. This is a great color combination to use on clouds also. So he'll look like he's got a white outfit on with a little bit of shadows. So now I'm going to go with my blues. I'm starting out with B37. And again, that's my darkest color. So I'm just putting that like along the edges of his pants, along the bottom of his pants, along the edges of his sleeves, where his two legs meet. Then I'll go over that with my B34 and make that each line a little wider. And then I'm just going to fill it in with the B32. There's not room for me to do a whole bunch of colors here. For the little girl, I wanted it to be a purple, so I'm going to use some BV13. That will be my darkest color on her. And just, where I think it's going to have some shadows along the edges of her clothes. And I used BV11 and then BV000 to finish her off. And I'm just using some of my darker warm grays, that's W6, and then W9 for the shoes, just to give it a little bit of contrast. I try to squeeze in two colors. Those small spots, if you don't want to do a lot of shading, don't worry about it. So now I'm just coloring in the chairs, and I'm using again more of my W's. This is W8, and I'm just trying to get like where things curve, and at the top of the like the top of the chair legs and the top of the back, and then I'm going to fill that in with W5. And again, I'm not being really fussy. I'm just trying to stay in the lines as much as I can. And I don't want to do the table legs. I just sort of want to make it look like wrought iron. That's all I want to do. So, and I forgot to add the darker color to the table legs, so I'm just going to add a little bit just to have some shading. So that's going to complete all of that. Now I just need to do faces, hair, and pizza. So I'm going to take some I'm going to try to keep the kids lighter because I made those mountains so dark. I'm going to try to keep the kids' hair and faces lighter. I actually find it a little hard to keep faces light. I find darker faces easier to color, so I'm practicing lighter faces. I'm starting out with E04 here, right around the hairline, and then I'm using the E11, and I'm going right over that E04 and filling it in, and then making it a little bit wider and pulling it down more toward the chin. And then the E21 goes back over the top, and I'm kind of flicking down into the center of the face. And not, I'm not agonizing over this. These are small spaces. As long as I get some shading in there, they will look fine. And I'm going to go back and do the same thing to their legs and arms. So I'm finishing it off with the E00 and just filling in all the rest of the spaces. So you can see on the other card I used darker skin tones and darker hair, and I felt like I had used darker skies. I felt like it was way too dark. So I'm going to do the same thing with the guy, except that for the pizzeria guy, I want to make his face a little bit darker. So I started out with the E29 on the pizzeria guy's face, and then I'm just going to go back through with the same colors that I used before. I'm using the E11, and then I'll pull out the E21, and then I'll pull out the E00. And again, I don't fuss too much over it. I just try to enjoy it, and I feel like every time I color a face and I color hair, I learn something and I get a little better. So I'm not, I would consider I'm by no means an expert Copic colorist. I definitely am an intermediate colorist. I'm not a beginner, but I'm definitely intermediate, and I am loving it. Now I'm going back through and doing their arms and legs and their necks, or whatever other parts I missed there, and the little girl's stomach. So same colors, trying to squeeze as many of those colors in. These are tiny little spots, and I've also got to do that pizzeria guy's hands, and so I'll get all of that done, and then I'll move on to the hair and the pizza. Such a cute little scene, and there's so many things, like there are plans, there is a cup, there are pizza boxes, like there's so many things you could add here, and you can just have a lot of fun with this. But I thought it would be fun to do a sunset scene, so now I'm just going to take some, like I'm using E30, and I'm just using little dots, E31, and just doing little dots on that pizza crust, and E33, and then going back with the 31 and the 30. I want to sort of make it look like it's it's got a little bit of texture, so I used R39 there for the pizza sauce, and I'll use some R24. And again, I'm just putting dots because it's small, and this is RV21 to finish it up, just to make it look red and sort of textured. So now I'm going to do the hair. And for the kids, I'm starting out with the darkest color I'm using, and that is E23. And I'm just sort of creating a part, and then just doing a few flicks spaced really far apart. And I'm trying to leave a lot of space. So now I'm using YR24 here, and trying to go sort of in between the flicks that I made. And then I will use my YR31. And then I still have white spots there, and I'm going to finish it off with some E50, because that actually it really brightens it up a lot. So that is all I'm going to do on the hair. And I'm just going to do it once, because I find that if I do it more than once, then it gets way too dark. I just end up making the hair darker and darker. So I'm practicing not doing that. I'm doing the same thing with the little boy, and I try to flick from where I create the part and then up from the bottom, and I just fill it in a little bit more with each color. Sorry, I'm a little out of the scene here and you can't see this. And then I just top it off with the E50 and call it a day. So that will take care of that. And then for the pizzeria guy's hair, I want him to have darker hair, but I sort of want it to be a little gray. So I'm going to use some of my W's. I'm starting out with W3, and his I would like to look textured, so I'm just doing dots. So I'm just using dots like W3, W5, and W8, I think that was. and then I just go back down, and I need to make sure I get his mustache, but I'm going to let him have a darker mustache. Although for my husband, that was the first thing, the beard was the first thing to get gray. So I left that with as a W8. And that's going to really complete the coloring on the kids. But now I'm going to create the cobblestones. So I'm using I think this is W3. Yes, W3 here. And I'm going to create randomly shaped rocks all over. And toward the bottom of the card there, they're going to be bigger, and I'm going to attempt to make them smaller and smaller as I go back. Sometimes I go overboard on the sides of the stones I'm creating, and I am leaving space in between them. I'm going to give them a highlight and or at least a darker outline. I want to make sure I get under the chairs, under the table. So I'm just doing random shapes. I'm trying not to make them too square because I have one of these stone patios. I think my house was built in 1950 and everybody did this in the 50s. So it's a weedy mess. I'm constantly weeding it, but they are not the same size or shape. Not one of them is the same size or shape. So I try not to make them square because they are really odd shapes. I'm trying to make them smaller as I go back because I want it to have the perspective that is in the distance. This ends up looking like a ginormous patio, but I really like this kind of background as far as like when I'm making a scene. I think this is a really fun scene, like base for your ground covering. This is one that I really like to do. I do this quite a lot. And I learned this from Mindy Baxter. So if you're looking for Copic coloring classes, that's a great place to do that. And I'm taking one shade darker. This is W4. And I'm just going around the left edge and the bottom of each rock to make it look, to like give it some thickness and a little bit of dimension. I'm trying to make sure I get every single rock, and those I didn't separate very well, so I'm going to make it look like I separated them and finish that off. And then I'm going to take one of the lighter grays and color in between them very lightly, and sort of like dots and wiggly marks like this. I believe this is W0 or W1. So I'm trying to keep it light and just filling it in. This is W1. And that's going to complete all the coloring on the card. It's really quick to do, actually. For about an hour of your time, you can actually get a great card. So I'm finishing it off. I've stamped "You have a pizza, my heart," which is my favorite sentiment, and I cut it down. So now I'm just adding some foam tape to the back, and I'll add this to a card base, and that's going to complete my card. I love starting out with one plain sheet of paper and just creating a whole scene. I think that it's so much fun to do this, and every time you do it you get better and better. So this card base is cut at 5.5 by 8.5. I scored and folded it at 4.25, and I put some double-sided sticky tape on it and added my card front, and that completes my card. So you will find the links to the other 7 Kids YouTube designers videos below, so please click on those and you'll see at least one more Pizza Parlor card, and you'll see a couple of the fairy cards, super cute stamp sets. All the links for 7 Kids Craft Store are below, along with their social media. We would appreciate it if you followed us on social media. Thank you so much for watching.